and all of the audience, ladies and gentlemen, our dear lecturer, and also all of the students of Master of Linguistics. Without further ado, to open this guest lecture, we would like to invite the head of Master of Linguistics, Dr. Mirsa Umiati, SSMHUM, to deliver her welcoming speech. From Dr. Mirsa, time is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. The Honorable Prof. Victor Lim and the Honorable lecturer in Warmadewa University and all of the participants of guest lecture this morning. We are very happy to have a guest lecture with Prof. Victor Lim coming from the Institute of Education National Nanyang Technological University, and we do hope that after our first activity in our guest lecture, we do hope that we can continue our collaboration, Prof, in other educational activities such as collaboration in joint research and community services. And with very short word, I just want to say that I hope that this guest lecture will benefit for all of the lecture and also our students, especially on the topic of multiliteracies in the Singapore English classroom, English language classroom, perception and practices. Okay, Peggy, I think that's all, and thank you very much. Greetings from Singapore.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the great welcoming speech from Dr. Mirsa Umiati. So for the next agenda, we will hear the presentation from our guest lecture that will be guided by our moderator. So we will invite Dr. Igusti Agung our moderator today in this session. So for the moderator, time is yours.
Thanks to Master of Ceremony. Well, Om Swastiastu. Yeah. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
The Honorable Director of Postgraduate Program, the Head of Master Program of Linguistics, the lecturers of Master Program of Linguistics, and also Bapak Prof. Sudipe join in this join for today.
Thank you,
yeah.
Budian.
All participants, our speakers of today, Associate Professor Dr. Faye Victor Lim. Ladies and gentlemen, all colleagues and friends, and also all participants. Welcome to this guest lecture. Well, my name is Igusti Ayu Agung Dian Susanti. I am one of the lecturers of Linguistic Master Program of Warmadewa University. And I'll be your guide in this presentation session. I'm so delighted to see you here to guide the speaker discussing about his paper in this guest lecture with the theme Multiliteracies in the English Language Classroom. This is necessary to do since all universities need to collaborate with others to assure that we globally exist. Well, ladies and gentlemen, before the presentation session, let me introduce the CV of the speaker first. Associate Professor Dr. Faye Victor Lim is the Assistant Professor, English Language and Literature Academic Group, National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technology University, Singapore. He is an education researcher and an educator. Expertise His expertise is in multimodality in education with a focus on multimodal literacy, multimodal discourse analysis, and digital learning. He is guided by the conviction that literacy education must be future-oriented and should progress with the evolving content communication landscape. He has over 1,670 citations and its index of 22 on Google Scholar. His research output is high quality in that 80% of his journal article, and he has a sole author monograph and another lead author monograph with Routledge. His 125 publications include 32 journal articles, 2 books, 24 book chapter, 1 working paper, 2 guidebooks, 17 research reports, 17 professional articles, 54 conference papers, 5 new commentaries, 2 multimedia products, 2 edit special journal issues, and 1 book review. And he also has teaching award. He received the John Chung Social Media Award in 2021 for exemplary and innovative use of social media in teaching, and NIE Excellence in Teaching Commendation in 2022. And he is also as international. He also has international recognition of his work. He has given more than 106 invited talks, including keynotes, a plenary lecture, seminar and workshop in Australia, China, France, Germany, Indonesia, Japan, Kuwait, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Mozambique, the Netherlands, Rwanda, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland, Vietnam, Taiwan, the United Arab Emirates, United States, and the United Kingdom. In Singapore, he has also given invited talks for the National Library, Art Science Museum, the Ministry of Education, universities, and schools. So give big applause to Professor Faye Victor Lim. Very, very amazing. And it is very an honor for us to have Associate Professor Dr. Lim Faye as our keynote speaker of today. Yes.
Thank you very much.
So we are going to invite Professor Dr. Faye Victor Lim to present the material, and this agenda will be divided into the first presentation, and then question and answer, and also conclusion. Well, for the first, we are going to invite Professor Faye Victor Lim. Please give warm welcome to Professor Dr. Faye Victor Lim.
Thank you very much, Gusti, for the very kind introduction, and thank you very much, Professor Misa, for the invitation to speak to you. Can I make sure that you are able to hear me well? Yes. Okay, I'm just going to turn off my volume so that I won't get an echo. But are you able to still hear me well? Yes, good.
Yes.
Now, what I will do now is to share my screen and make sure that you're able to see my slides. So this is the presentation I have for you. Okay, wait, are you able to see my slides clearly? Yes, good. Thank you very much for taking time this morning to hear the work that I've been doing here at the National Institute of Education. So what I'm sharing with you is one example of a research project that many of our faculty members here at the National Institute of Education conduct with teachers and schools. The purpose of this project is really for us to understand how multiliteracies is taught and learned in the English language classroom in Singapore. And you will find that there are many projects that my colleagues are taking as well that would focus on thinking about how we can improve the ways we teach and students learn in the Singapore school classroom context. Now, we are a part of the National Institute of Education, which means that there is a lot of focus on applying the understanding from theories, from research into improving the practices in the classroom. So that is one of the key focus of the work that we do. Now, I want to encourage you today also to make this session yours. So what it means is that if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. There's a chat function on Zoom. As I speak later on, if you have any questions that you would like me to clarify a little bit more, or if you have any comments that you want to put in the chat, and during the question and answer session, I would look at it later. Of course, I also encourage you to engage with me in a time of discussion during the question and answer. So I will speak for about 65 minutes. I'll give you a sense of what the project that I have taken looks like, what are some of the key findings from the project and the recommendations that we have for the policymaker. And what I want to hear from you really will be your thoughts, your questions, your reflections on the work that I'm sharing with you. So I look forward to hearing from you. Now, let me first begin by taking a step back and asking ourselves the question, why do we want to focus on multiliteracies as a project? Now, if all of you think about what we understand as literacy, and I understand that many of you are literacy teachers, language teachers in the classroom, you will know that literacy today is not just reading, writing, speaking, and listening. If you think about the kind of multimedia text that our young people are engaged in on the mobile devices, on the internet, on social media, you'll find that they are doing a lot more than just reading, more than just writing, more than just speaking, more than just listening. They are also viewing a lot of multimedia text. They are also representing, by putting pictures on Instagram, by putting videos on TikTok, representing their ideas and identities. Now, this recognition that our literacy today must expand beyond language learning is also taken up by the United Nations, UNESCO, right? So they see that beyond conventional concepts of a set of reading, writing, and counting skills, literacy today is now understood as a means of identification, understanding, interpretation, creation, and communication in an increasing digital text-mediated, information-rich, and fast-changing world. These are the literacy demands that our young people have today, as well as for their future workplace. So the question for all of us as language teachers, as literacy educators, is how can we prepare our young people well for these literacy demands? How can we prepare them well to engage with the communicative practices in the digital age? So what is this digital age that we talk about? Well, one of the things that is happening, I believe, not just in Singapore, but Indonesia, in different parts of the world, is that mobile devices are becoming a lot more common in the hands of our young people. Many of them will have at least a mobile device, and that is in part because it's also very affordable, it's getting cheaper, but also in part because it's so much of their peer practices, the friends around them will all have a mobile phone as well. So in order for them to connect with their friends, to engage with their friends, a mobile device in their pocket, in their hands, is something that's becoming very common. And with mobile devices, you'll recognize that multimedia communication is so prevalent. I mean, when you look at the social media platforms like Facebook, like Instagram, like TikTok, you don't really just look at words alone. You are also viewing images, you're also viewing videos. And of course, a lot of the social media platforms are not getting you to just consume the content. They are also prompting our young people to upload posts, put photos, upload videos, to share about their lives, their identities, their experiences. And this is the part of the communicative practices the young people experience. Now, the other recognition of the digital age is the multimodal turn. What does this mean? It means that there's a higher awareness, a heightened awareness of the role of media in our culture. In the past, we tend to gain knowledge through reading books, and that is still true today. But you also know that many of our young people, including ourselves, we are also gaining knowledge, not just through reading books, but also through viewing videos, through engaging on multimedia. So the media has become a very critical part of our life, and digital technology has accentuated the multimodal nature of meaning making. What it means is that in the past, a lot of the knowledge, a lot of our communication is done through words, but you'll find that today, increasingly, we are expressing our knowledge through words, through images, through animation, through music, through video, as a way of connecting with the people around us. So this is the digital age that we live in. And one of the greatest challenges for teachers is to teach in a way that we have not been taught before, and to teach things that we have not ourselves learned. But as literacy educator, we need to look at the digital age. We need to think about the kind of literacy demands that our young people have, and think about how we can guide them and support them so that they are able to be effective communicator, be so-called literate in today's digital age. And that is really the backdrop of what we want to do in this Multiliteracies project. Now, the idea that we have is not really new. Back in the late 1990s, in fact, in 1996, we have a group of academics. They call themselves the New London Group. I'm not sure whether you have heard of them, but I'm sure you have heard of the term multiliteracies. Now, this group of academics coming from different parts of the world, the US, the Europe, Australia, what they had in common was this interest in understanding how we can prepare our young people for the world of tomorrow. So back in 1996, they put out a manifesto, a program that says that we need to think about literacy not just as language learning, but we need to think of it as multiliteracies. So in fact, this group of people are the ones that introduced to the world the term multiliteracies that has become very common today. And in fact, multiliteracies has also been incorporated in many education systems in the language and literacy curriculum in Australia, in Finland, in Singapore as well, which I will talk about a little bit more. So what is multiliteracies that we mentioned here? Now, they explain here that we add two multis to the idea of literacies to represent the multi of enormous and significant differences in context and patterns of communication, recognizing that the young people in your classroom come to you with different experiences, different socioeconomic background, and they bring with them different understanding and knowledge about language and ways of meaning making. So that is the first aspect. And mind you, this was in the late 1990s where people were excited about the idea of globalization, the idea of the world being a global village. And of course, multiliteracies was very much a response to that. The second multi is the multi of multimodality, recognizing that multiliteracies seeks to address the variability of meaning making in different cultural, social, or domain-specific contexts, in part from the characteristics of the new information and communication media. So very much the things that I talked about just now. how digital technology allow you not to just represent your ideas and communicate with words, but it prompts you and allow you to also represent your ideas through images, through animation, through music, through videos very easily. And this would therefore change the way teachers and students need to think about what literacy is. So that is the idea of multiliteracies, and that is the term that was coined way back in 1996. That has become very powerful and influential even today. Now, the other key concept that I want to talk about is the idea of multimodality. You know, some of you may have heard of it. Some of you, this may be a little new. Well, multimodality is not a difficult concept. It essentially means that people draw on distinctly different sets of resources for meaning making. So when we express our ideas, we express our experiences, we use speech, we use words, but at the same time, we also use gaze and gesture. We also use images, we use animation, we use layout. So essentially, we never really just operate with just using words alone, but we have a whole range of different resources that we use to make meaning, right? So that is the idea of multimodality. And I would love to hear your thoughts and your questions. So feel free to use the chat function to put in the questions and thoughts you have as I introduce these key concepts to you. Are you guys okay? I hope things are all right. Okay. So as I mentioned just now, the notion of multiliteracies have brought about a revolution in many literacy curricula all around the world, thinking that literacy is not just about language learning, but also include multimodality. It's a recognition of the many ways in which meanings are made, and therefore the need to build up the semiotic resources of students who are the agentive meaning makers across contexts as part of the literacy curriculum requirements. So think about your students when they graduate to work, they will need to give presentations. And when they give presentations, of course, they use speech. They need to use gestures well, but I'm sure they will be using PowerPoint slides or even videos, charts, diagrams, figures as a way of expressing and communicating their ideas. So what we want to do in multiliteracies is to prepare our students so that they are able to make meaning through using a whole range of semiotic or what we call meaning-making resources. So let's, these are the big ideas that I talk about, the key concepts, but let's focus on the context of Singapore, which I'm most familiar with. So I will tell you a little bit more about the Singapore context. And of course, given that you are in Indonesia, you will have a different curriculum, a different set of contexts, and you can think about how it applies or is similar or different from what you are doing as a teacher, as a lecturer in a university, as well as graduate students. Perhaps many of you are also teachers in schools as well. So in the Singapore syllabus, we introduced formally the term multiliteracies in the latest curriculum, the ELS, the English Language Syllabus 2020. And the purpose really was to reflect an expanded notion of literacy. So this is our English language syllabus, but we don't just focus on the English language, not just on reading, writing, speaking, and listening, but we have also incorporated the skills of viewing and representing. So viewing of multimodal text, of multimedia, and representing, creating of multimedia, multimodal text as well. So representing of, say, images, posters, comic strips, digital stories, e-portfolios, and all these are part of the learning of literacy. So what in Singapore context, we use the term 21st century competencies because we see this as the kind of knowledge and skills that our young people need to have in the new world. And the recognition is that multiliteracies together with metacognitive skills and inquiry through dialogue will support students' development of 21st century competence, help them better to be for the challenges that the world ahead. So what does this mean? I've talked about the familiar skills of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. But now in Singapore, we have two more new skills. So we have viewing, for example. Viewing is paired together with the receptive skills of reading and listening. And representing is coupled with the productive skills of writing and speaking. And they are integrated because they want to connect what we call conventional literacies, which is reading, writing, speaking, listening, to the different semiotic modes in language and development. So viewing is nested as one of the specific aims of the syllabus to develop students' ability to listen, to read, and view critically and with accuracy, understanding and appreciation a wide array of literacy and information text, standard English from print, non-print, and digital network sources. I don't know whether in Indonesia you are concerned about the idea of fake news. So sometimes on social media, there is a fake news that is being propagated. Well, in Singapore, we certainly are. And a few years ago, we had a law about fake news. But beyond just laws, we are also interested in how through education, we are able to guide students to be critical when they view the kind of different multimodal text, the multimedia that seek to persuade them online as well. And this is representing. Now, representing is for the teachers to design opportunities for students to engage in authentic and creative production of a variety of texts for different purposes through speaking, writing, and representing in order to demonstrate the use of language with confidence, persuasion, and thoughtfulness. In the past, students tend to just write in a language classroom. They have to write compositions, they have to write their responses to comprehension questions, and writing as a way of expressing ideas is privileged. Now, in a multiliteracies classroom, apart from just writing, we also want the students to represent, to create images, PowerPoints, slides, digital stories as a way to represent their ideas. So students are expected to develop the ability to use a range of semiotic modes to create text, including multimodal and hybrid texts, which are coherent and cohesive, as well as consistent with the intended purpose for text creation. So viewing and representing are now two new key areas that we want to develop in our students, in addition to the conventional areas of reading, writing, speaking, and listening in language learning. So this gives you an example of the learning outcomes that we have in the syllabus related to multiliteracies, or what I call multimodal literacy. So the idea of getting them to recognize how semiotics modes work together, getting them to interplay and combine the use of different semiotic modes becomes very important. And this is the backdrop for my project on the multiliteracies in the Singapore English language classroom. Now, it is a design-based research project with two key phases. The first phase of the project is to understand how multiliteracies are taught in Singapore schools. And then the second phase, we wanted to develop approaches to design for multimodal literacy. Now, multimodal literacy is a subset of multiliteracies that relates to the viewing and representing of multimodal text. So what we did was to work with 10 classes across 5 schools, 3 secondary, 2 primary schools, to understand how multiliteracies are taught, and also think about how we can design approaches to help students and teachers to be able to teach and learn multimodal literacy. Now, the first phase report has been published in 2020. If you scan the QR code on the screen, you'll be able to access the open access available. So you may want to do that, and you can see the findings from there. So this is to give you a sense of the teachers that we work with, as well as the students that we engage in. And in the first phase, we did a few things. We observed the teachers' lessons. We told them we wanted to see an example of a teach or how to teach, but we wanted to just have a sense of how they were teaching. The intention really for us was to meet the teachers where they are, to understand their current practices with regard to teaching multiliteracy. So in 2019, we went to the schools and then we observed the teachers. And then we interviewed the teachers before the lessons and after the lessons, both to understand their interpretation of multiliteracies, what challenges they face in teaching, viewing, and representing, the support they needed, and also for us to better understand what we observe in the lesson. We also engage with the students. We surveyed the students to understand their perception about learning with multimodal text. We also conducted focus group discussion with a smaller group of students to find out about their expectations of lessons with multimodal text. What were they expecting to learn and what kind of experiences they have had so far, what they liked, what they didn't like. So that was the design of the research. And of course, then we did the analysis. We recorded the lessons, we took few notes, we conducted the pre-lesson interviews, post-lesson interviews, survey responses, and focus group discussion. So we had a team that we worked with to do the research in the schools so that we have a better understanding of multiliteracies in the language classroom. And this was the way we have analyzed the data. We analyze it according to lesson microgenres, which focus on the type of discourses that were used in the classroom, whether the discourse focused on the content, or was it on meta language, semiotic awareness, or was it on discourse that was focusing on discipline? So if you look at one whole lesson, how much time is devoted to what type of discourse in the classroom? We also analyze not just what the teacher said, but also the teacher's use of gestures and space in the class. So that's genre analysis. We then look at the interviews and we did thematic analysis. Similarly, for the students' focus group discussion, we did both thematic analysis as well. And we look at the students' responses of the survey. So the lesson microgenre, I'm not going to go into technicality. If you're interested during the discussion, we can talk more about it. Essentially, it derives from Francis Christie curriculum genre theory that think about the overall structure of learning in the classroom in relation to the macro design of the curriculum. So what we wanted to do was to look at the discourses, the different specific registers in the classroom, whether they were more instructional oriented or regulative oriented. Instructional discourse are discourses that deal with the content of the lesson, the disciplinary knowledge, and regulative discourse are content that deals with the conduct of the lesson, really getting the students to behave, giving permission to the students to go to the washroom, for instance, regulating misbehavior in the classroom. And so we have a way of unpacking that. So for instance, you will have some examples of the regulative discourse here, right? Seeing what are the things that the students are doing. Like for instance, you talk about perhaps attendance, taking, checking on homework. All these are part of regulative discourse. This is an example of instructional discourse. So there may be discourse that focus on the content, on skills, on language, on exams, perhaps. But what we were interested in were discourse on, say, philosophy, whether the questions promoted the students' critical reflection, discourse on genre knowledge, teaching the forms and features of the multimodal text, multimodal awareness, teaching the ways in which semiotic modes make meaning. And then examples of regulative discourse, again, you have some of these things that we talk about, rapport building, motivation, and then lesson closure. So I think I would not do this, but I will show you that this is the example of a lesson. So what we did was to quote the teacher's lesson. And then and then we identify the different types of discourse, and we use a network visualization to see the relationship between the discourses. So these are the approaches we adopted to look at the first phase findings. And what did we find? Now, there are a few key things that we noted from our engagement with the teachers and students. The first is that we recognize that multiliteracies was seen as both teachers by students and teachers as important. So they recognized that it was important. The teachers, of course, offered a range of perspective on what the teaching of multiliteracies could look like. And so they have different ways of teaching multiliteracies in their lessons. So it was very varied and interesting. The second finding was that authentic multimodal texts were commonly used in the classroom. They brought in posters, they brought in photographs, they brought in newspapers or websites. So all these are live texts that our young people engaged with out of the classroom. And we were happy to see that the teachers were also using these texts that were considered to be more relatable and relevant to them as well. So that was great. The third finding was that we found while the teachers were using multimodal text, very often it was more as a stimulus for reading and writing, getting the students to learn language. So for instance, using a video as a way to engage the students, make them laugh or get them to be inspired. But ultimately, the focus was still on reading and writing. Or they may use a picture as a way to get the students to think about some ideas before they start writing. So multimodal text were used, but many a times it was just a way to have better writing and reading experiences, and less often for the teaching of critical viewing and effective representing skills. So very few occasions are observed where the teachers actually guided the students on how to view posters, multimedia videos in a critical way. And very, very few occasions were given to the students to make artifacts and make multimodal text as well. So very little occasions for representing skills. We observe, of course, in for viewing, some lessons teachers did do that. And what they did was to guide the students to explore and reflect on how semiotic modes were used to create multimodal in the text in these lessons. But very few lessons and very little attention was given to the explicit teaching of representing skills. Hardly where we had occasions where students curated multimodal artifacts. So that was our observation, and of course we published a series of papers to talk about why that was the case. Many a times it has to do with the examination system that we have in Singapore, where there was a lot of focus on preparing students for the exams, and therefore they need to focus on writing and on reading. And even though multiliteracies, even though viewing and representing are in the curriculum, there was less emphasis on that simply because it was not so much tested in the examination. So these were the findings, and I encourage you to look at the first report that we have that give you a little bit more information as well as the quotation of teachers and students related to this. But what I want you to do, what I want to do right now actually is to get you to focus on the second report that we just published last year. So that is the second report. So we have completed the data collection and most of the analysis for this project, and we are in this stage of disseminating the findings. And in the second report, what we did was that we outlined the work that we did with the teachers. So after observing their lessons, after interviewing with them, we then introduced to them the ideas of multiliteracies. We then taught them about ways they can teach multiliteracies in their classroom differently. And what we did was to work very closely with the teacher participants and design, in fact, co-design lesson packages with them for the classes they were teaching. So based on what they have taught earlier on, we came up with certain ideas of how they can improve the lessons, and then they co-design it, and then they implemented it to their students. So what we wanted to do in our project, as I mentioned, was to develop theoretically informed, but yet also practically grounded instructional approaches for the teaching of multimodal literacies. And this is done through the researchers and teachers working very closely to co-design the lesson packages. Now, the work has been done, and what we have here is the final report for the second phase of the research project. And similarly, you can go to the QR code to scan and have available the full report that we have prepared for the Education Ministry, because the Education Ministry are the people who funded us in this project. So that is the report. So what are the things that we have found, and what are the things that we have developed as we work closely with the teachers, as we think about ways to teach multimodal literacy? Now, in a book that has just been published with my colleague, Dr. Lydia Tancha, we introduced, based on the experiences from this project, the different approaches that we can design learning for multimodal literacy. So this is very much inspired by the work of Bill Cope and Mary Calentis in the Learning by Design framework. So what we have done in this book is to introduce the 4 learning processes that a multiliteracies lessons can go through so that students are able to learn better. Now, this was also the set of approaches or the learning processes that were used to guide all the lessons that we work with the teachers. And then this is also expressed through the lesson packages that has emerged from the project. So what does this mean? Well, the learning processes, I will introduce these ideas to you broadly here. If you're interested, of course, you can look at the final report through the QR code that I mentioned just now. And there are, of course, references to the lesson packages that you can actually look at and also download and use and try out with the secondary or primary school students in your context. There are also links to papers that we have published from the project. Many of them are preprint, so they are openly accessible that you can look at a little bit more. So essentially, in terms of the learning processes, drawing from the work of learning by design, we argue that in order for students to learn multiliteracies, they can go through the 4 different types of processes. The first is encountering, where they experience the text and they are guided to notice the different meanings that are made through multimodal text. Second is through exploring, where they are able then to start thinking about the type of meanings that are made in the text. And very often in this stage, the teacher will introduce to them a pedagogic meta language to begin to guide them in noticing and talking about the meanings that are made in a multimodal text. So for instance, in an advertisement, getting them to recognize the headline and what the headline does, getting them to recognize that there's always a call to action in the advertisement and to look out for where the call to action might be, getting them to think about how they can use emotion as a way in the meaning made in images to persuade the audience, for instance. And then the yellow learning process deals with evaluating, where we want our students to critically think about the meanings they are made, the values that this text represent, and whether they agree with these values or not. Finally, in the learning process of expressing, the students are given opportunities to create text, to make text. And this could also be expressed through role play, drama, activities in the classroom, where they are expressing their ideas, their identities, their experiences, not just with words, but through a whole range of different artifacts, even through embodied meaning making. So what does this mean? Again, you look at the 4 learning processes: encountering, exploring, evaluating, and expressing. Now, encountering really focuses a lot more on affective engagement. So we want to engage with the students' emotions, that learning is not just about brain work, it's not just about thinking, but we want to value their life work in literacy learning. We want to bring in the kind of live text that they have in the classroom. So the kind of social media text that they use out of school, we want to bring it into the classroom so that they will not see a disconnect between what they are learning in class with what they are experiencing after school. We want it to be bridge this for them. The second learning process is exploring, and that is something that we are more familiar with. That is about the cognitive understanding the text. And as I mentioned just now, one of the ways we do this for multimodality is to introduce a pedagogic meta language for thinking and talking about multimodality. So if you think about language learning, you will introduce to your students grammar, what are subjects, what are verbs, what are adjectives, what are adverbs. This is the meta language for language learning. Similarly, for images, for videos, for websites, there are also meta language that can allow you to talk and think about the meanings that are made in the text. And cognitive understanding is important because that will give them ways to explain their interpretation of the different types of text they see. And then we go to evaluating as a learning process. And this is where we want to develop critical thinking in our students. We are encouraging them to have questions about the text. We want them to be able to discuss their ideas, their interpretation of the text with one another, collaboratively through social knowledge building. And moving from critical perspective, we also want our students to express their ideas, their experiences, their identities in multimodal ways through embodied learning. So students can make different types of text, they can create a video, they can make a digital story, they can create a comic strip or storyboard, and he used digital tools even to make memes as a way to express their ideas. And this helps them to recognize that when they communicate, they are not just communicating with words, but with a whole range of different multimodal resources as well. So if you're interested, you can find out a little bit more on the book that we have just published this year on designing learning for multimodal literacy. And that, in a nutshell, gives outlines the work that we have done in our project, but outlining also the pedagogic meta language that we have introduced to the teachers. Now, from the second report, we also outline certain recommendations that we have for the policymakers at the Education Ministry. So after we have done the projects with the teachers and with the students, we wanted to tell the policymakers, the curriculum planners at the Education Ministry, some of the recommendations. So the first recommendation is for us to optimize the curriculum space for multiliteracies learning. Now in Singapore, of course, there is firm commitment to the teaching and learning of multiliteracies at the policy level because it's in the curriculum and it has been explicated as one of the pedagogical emphasis in a national English language syllabus. So when the teachers are teaching multiliteracies, it's not something that they are doing that is extra. It's something that is part of the curriculum and syllabus. But of course, many of them will say that they don't have time to do it because there's a lot of other pressure to complete the language learning part of the curriculum. And the recommendations we are making, therefore, is to think about how they can optimize curriculum space for multiliteracies learning. Perhaps when assessments are taken away at certain key stages in the Singapore context, they can have more time to engage in the learning of multiliteracies. The second, of course, is to teach viewing and representing explicitly. As I mentioned just now, a lot of emphasis on language learning, but less on viewing and representing. And our encouragement to the teachers is really to think about how viewing and representing can be taught more explicitly in the classroom. The third is to design learning for multimodal literacies, thinking about the learning processes that I talked about just now, and really thinking about how language learning in the classroom or literacy learning in the classroom should not just be focusing on the cognition alone, but there must be also emphasis given to the affective, the emotional, as well as the embodied learning. So learning should be engaging, should be fun, but not just an engagement with the mind, but also an engagement with the emotions, as well as getting them opportunities to make and express meaning differently. So related to that is the opportunities we want to have our students to make meaning through a multiliteracies pedagogy that emphasize a sense of authenticity, the connection with the kind of live text that young people bring in, student agency, giving them a sense of control over the activities in the classroom through collaboration as well as digital technology. Next, our recommendation is really to get the teachers to think about how they can use formative assessment practices as a way to reinforce the learning of viewing and representing. So, so in a classroom, they can provide feedback to the students viewing of multimodal text, to the students representing creation of multimodal text as well. For the curriculum planners and policy makers, we also encourage them to think about the assessment of multiliteracies in the English language curriculum. So currently, images are assessed at a small part in the English language exams, and we are thinking about how it can be strengthened further. Perhaps the exploration of e-portfolio can be a way so that students can provide a record, a repository of their learning in different ways. The next recommendation also relates to the policymakers. Even the more ambitious goals and outcomes in the new syllabus, multiliteracies, we do encourage the policymakers to think about supporting teachers with guidance and support through pre-service training and professional development so that they are able to design for multiliteracies learning for their students. So that becomes a key aspect, because ultimately, the change cannot just be in the curriculum, not just in the syllabus itself. You need to empower teachers with the training and the support and the resources so that they are able then to deliver the curriculum outcomes in the classroom. As I mentioned earlier on, the challenge really is in teaching and learning in ways that we have not been taught before, and therefore it is important to build up the competencies of our teachers to be able to do that. And finally, I want to encourage, of course, the policymakers to think about how researchers and teachers can work together to deepen understanding of multiliteracies teaching and learning, and also to offer contextually sensitive principles and strategies based on further research. So for instance, the work that we have developed in Singapore, the ideas that we have developed in Singapore may not necessarily work in Indonesia because of the different context, the different profile of students that you may have. And therefore, we need Indonesian researchers to work with Indonesian teachers to be able to adapt some of these ideas, the principles, into your own context so that it becomes relevant for the people that you are serving. So these are the lesson packages that we have developed over the last few years with the teachers. And they are all accessible for free. Even the resources that has been developed can be used by teachers in Singapore as well as all over the world if you like. And this can be accessible through the QR code that I talked about just now. But I also want to encourage you, as I mentioned just now, not to just adopt them wholesale. As teachers, as lecturers and professors, you can pick and choose and adapt accordingly based on the context of your schools as well as the profile of your students, how it can be used meaningfully. The good thing, of course, is that you don't have to start from ground zero. You already have some of these things that have been tested in Singapore, piloted in Singapore, and now you are free to use it and build on it. Now, in the final part of my presentation, I just want to take a step back and reflect on some of the challenges that we face in teaching multiliteracies in the English language classroom. This is the reflection we have from both the teachers as well as the researchers through the research project. And I'm going to share with you some ways we can think about addressing these challenges. The first is in relation to the resources for thinking and talking about multimodality. So when we say teach multiliteracies, the teachers are wondering, okay, how do I teach it? What do I teach? And therefore, it became important for us to develop a meta language to guide the teachers and students to know what are the key concepts and key terms when it comes to, say, understanding an advertisement or a film or a video, a TikTok video, for instance. What are some of the ways you can describe and talk about the features of these videos? But learning the meta language also becomes an issue because it means that there's a set of terms, a set of concepts that you want both the teachers and students to learn. The second set of challenge has to do with the perception of teachers and students relating to priorities of teachers because of examination, as well as students, interestingly, also may face some resistance and skepticism because they are very concerned about their results. And if what they are doing in the classroom do not translate into results, sometimes they may feel a little reluctant to put in their best effort as well. And the third set of challenge relates to the practices in the classroom, the curriculum and assessment chasm, the difference between what is in the curriculum and what is tested in examinations, as well as the emphasis of teachers. So as I mentioned, in relation to developing the meta language, one of the challenges in research in multimodal studies is that reliable applicable categories have not yet been well established by empirical investigation. And many a times when you build potentially over rigid meta language construct into the curriculum, can also be considered just a stopgap measure at best. And therefore, there's a need for closer consideration in the context of new literacies and the extent in which the framework proposed that we have, the meta language, can be extended to complex combination of expressive resources. So the meta language that's used, say, in Singapore for different types of text could be different from those that's used in Indonesia. And of course, the recognition that if you just want to bring in academic theories and research into the classroom directly, it can be very hard for the teachers and students especially. So if you want to teach multimodal meaning making to primary school students, you need to be able to translate what you have into a vocabulary that is accessible to these primary school students. And of course, therefore, the aim is to develop both theoretically robust yet practically grounded framework to scaffold the analysis of multimodal text for the young and to teach them critical viewing. So that's why we talk about we use the term pedagogic meta language. So it's not just a meta language, but a pedagogic one that actually is appropriate to the specific age group that you are targeting. Priorities, we have mentioned earlier on that teachers tend to use multimodal text more as a stimulus for reading and writing, less for viewing and representing. And of course, we found also that the students may want to keep the world of home and school separate. And therefore, it's important for us to also recognize the skepticism and resistance that students may have when we want to bring in live text into the classroom. And now, of course, in one of the papers, we have reported on how the test items in our examination, as well as international exams like PISA and PIRST, have a very low proportion on image-language relations. Very few image essential items that require students to engage with the meaning made with the image. And therefore, it's important for the examination to reflect the emphasis of the curriculum. So in the Singapore context, you have multiliteracies now in the curriculum, but it needs to be tested more explicitly in the examination for the teachers and the students to take it seriously. So teachers tend to, of course, focus a lot on language learning, and therefore we need to create opportunities for students' multimodal meaning making. So these are some of the emphasis that we have talked about, some of the challenges that we've talked about. But at the same time, through the work that we have done, we have also identified some possible solutions or considerations that can help us teach multiliteracies better in the classroom. So it's not just terrible doom and gloom, a lot of challenges, but there are also possibilities in relation to managing the meta language, in relation to guiding them with the knowledge and skills for viewing, as well as in relation to the professional learning of teachers to build up their competencies to teach multiliteracies. So the first is in terms of managing the meta language. While there's interest in building up empirical evidence to have a robust set of meta language, we also recognize that teaching and learning cannot wait for gold standard, and we need to work with what Michael Fullan has called sufficing standard, or what is available to us. So using one of the concepts and ideas in multimodality, even though it may not be fully empirically verified, we can still use these ideas and concepts as ways to guide our teachers and students thinking about multimodal meaning making. So one of the examples, some of you may be familiar with the work of Kress and Van Leuven. And so the pedagogic meta language is based on the foundation of frameworks from Kress and Van Leuven, but yet at the same time, we want it to be capable of supporting sophisticated critical analysis, but yet at the same time not make too unrealistic demands on teachers and learner knowledge, and not make them feel that, oh, this is another set of grammar that I have to learn. Rather, the meta language should be a resource to help teachers and students think and talk about multimodal meaning making. And that was a goal in our research project that I've showed the book, the report to you. Right? So there's a process of translational research that's important. And right, so when I work with the teachers in the project, I did not just tell them that these are the framework that's been developed in research, use it in the classroom. But what we did was a whole process of co-design so that the framework that was developed in the classroom can be meaningfully translated to the needs of the students. So the teachers may say that this concept is too difficult, let's not use this. This term may be too complex, let's use a simpler term, so that we are able then to meet the needs and interests of the teachers and students in the classroom. The second consideration relates to language learning and multimodality. And we know, as I mentioned, the learning of viewing and representing were integrated with other areas of language learning should be given due emphasis as part of literacy development. So we need to help the teachers recognize that there are specific knowledge and skills, and you can guide the students in learning these knowledge and skills. And while explicit focus is needed to guide students viewing and representing, at the same time, an integrated approach for language learning is important as well, because ultimately, you hardly just have images by itself, or you hardly just have words by itself. They are always combined multimodally in text. And therefore, with the multimodal knowledge built and semiotic awareness developed in the foundational stages of multimodal literacy learning, then teachers and students can then draw on their learning experience to engage with text with both the language and the other semiotic modes appropriately combined, so that they're engaging with multimodal text in the learning experience. The third set of consideration relates to educators developing their semiotic sensitivities towards reforming assessment measures so that they're able to capture and credit qualities of meaning design work that students do, right? So recognizing how they can give feedback, positive and meaningful feedback to the students, creation of images, videos is also very important. And part of it is to develop the students as well as teachers' semiotic awareness to be able to do so. And that can be done through professional learning. And of course, there are different ways of professional learning. You can have training workshops that is done, professional development sessions, but we also encourage through the project for teachers to be leading communities of practice in the classroom. So for them to come together and say that, oh, we are interested in designing a multiliteracies learning lessons. So how can we share our experiences and resources with one another in the different schools to do it? So that was a very powerful way to build up teachers' competencies, as well as for them to be plugged into a community of network that they have that kind of peer support in relation to a particular curriculum innovation that they're adopting. So these are the key considerations that we have. And at the end of the day, we want to build the teacher's competency to be able to teach multiliteracies. At the same time, we also want to inform the policy makers, the curriculum planners on some of the key recognition of how we can implement the curriculum with fidelity. So when multiliteracies is part of the curriculum, we want to be able, therefore, to see how multiliteracies can be translated, not just from the, we want to see how multiliteracies can be translated from the curriculum documents, from the paper, into practices into the classroom, and that becomes very important. So in a nutshell, that is the purpose of my research, integrating multiliteracies into the Singapore English classroom. What we did in this research project was to not come to the schools and tell the teachers that we know better, just do what we want you to do, and apply this set of frameworks into the learning of multiliteracies. What we did instead was to adopt the position that we have some ideas, but we may not know it all. We want to partner with you. We want to work with you to co-design the learning experiences for multiliteracies. And what we wanted to do in the first phase was to first understand the teachers and the students, their priorities, their practices, the way they were teaching it, before we went into the second phase of co-designing the lesson packages with the teachers and getting their feedback. And we know that the lesson packages that we shared with you, many of the teachers have also tested it with other teachers in their school, and they have also tried to adapt it accordingly for the different profiles of their learners. So these are the outcomes of the multiliteracies project, and I've shared with you some of the challenges and considerations that have emerged. So I would love to hear from you. What were some of the thoughts, some of the questions that you have? I see that there are some comments in the chat, and I will be interested to see what these are.
Well, thank you
Okay,
very much.
so should I take this or would you lead me through it, Gusty?
Thank you very much, Dr. V. Victor Lim, for the great material and also explanation about multiliteracies, literacy today, multimodality, expanding literacy, Singapore English language syllabus, the examples of learning outcomes related multimodal literacy that is very, very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Victor Lim. And next session is question and answer session. We have got some people to ask question. Well, first we are going to invite 3 people to ask question. The first is from Mr. Adi. Mr. Adi.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr.
Please.
Can you hear me? Can you hear my voice?
Right?
Yes. Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, dear Prof. Victor, a very interesting presentation. Thank you so much. Very inspiring and really mind-opening. And I would like to. I'm very curious to find out all these.
Ini laptopnya tapi enggak udah ini
Sorry?
tapi di lambat sekali WhatsApp-nya.
Sorry, Dr. Gung. I think there is other speakers.
Please continue. Yes, please continue,
Okay.
Mr. Adi.
Yes. So all the findings that you have found during your research, how did it impact the national education policy in designing the English language classroom? English language learning, teaching and learning. So I mean, how did it impact the Ministry of Education in designing the curricula for the students on all levels, from primary, even probably at the kindergarten level up to the higher education? And then the second, how did it impact as well the teacher professional development program? I think that would be a good lesson for Indonesia to learn from how Singapore apply this in the national level. Thank you so much, Prof. Victor.
Thank you very much, Pak Adi. This is a very good question, very important question as well, because as researchers, we do want our research not just to be published in papers, in books, but we want it to really impact policy as well as practice. So that is something that researchers in NIE is very interested in doing as well. Not just publishing papers, which is good, but at the end of the day, the policy and practice impact is equally important. So what we have done so far, first of all, I must say that the findings have just been reported last year. So it's still in the early days, but there are a few things that is happening. The first is in terms of pre-service training. So I teach pre-service students in terms of multiliteracies, and I also teach graduate students, master students on multiliteracies as well. So certainly the findings from the project has already informed the design of my courses in guiding both pre-service students as well as master students on recognizing how they can better teach multiliteracies. So that is in terms of professional learning. The second aspect is in Singapore is unique in the sense that I don't know whether it's the same in Indonesia, where we have master teachers, teachers who are very experienced and they are mentoring other teachers. So the master teachers in Singapore are put together in this academy called the Academy of Singapore Teachers, and they are the ones that would conduct workshops and mentor younger teachers in the system. So what I have done, of course, is to work very closely now with a principal master teacher in terms of applying the lesson principles as well as using some of these packages that we have developed in schools. So that is one way in which we can partner with the right stakeholders so that they are able then to understand what we are doing in research and then translate that in their workshops for teachers, the in-service workshop that many of them are doing. So that is the other way in which the findings of this project is translated into practice, very much through the master teachers who are the key players in this regard. The third way is working with the teachers on our research projects. And many of them have become more confident in their own way of teaching multiliteracies. And they have also started to lead community of practice. They have started to conduct workshops. They have also started to lead other teachers in their school on the teaching of multiliteracies. So they are our best, in a sense, they are our best publicity because they have gone through the process, they have learned, we have spent a lot of time with them to help them, and now they are in the school guiding and mentoring other teachers as well. So that is the third way in which we hope to impact practice. The last way is something that we have done and we are continuing to do, and that is to engage the policymakers and the curriculum planners. Now we have a 5-year review of the curriculum, so things will take time to happen, but we have already shared our findings to the policymakers, and in April I'm going to share another round to the senior management at the Education Ministry on the recommendations that we have, and hopefully through this sharing, they would think about how they want to assess multiliteracies a little bit more in the national examinations as well. So engagement with the policymakers, giving presentations to them, writing reports that are not just academic, but also friendly enough for the very busy policymakers to read, such as the 2 reports that I shared with you, are very important ways in which researchers are able to think about how they can translate what they have done in the classroom with the teachers from research into actual policy changes. So these are some of the things, and I hope that I've answered your question, Pak Adi.
Well, thank you very much for your explanation.
Yeah,
Dr.
Dr. Gung,
Yes.
want to respond to that a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah, Prof. Victor, I think that's very, very interesting that you mentioned about the Master Teacher Program that helped mentor other teachers. And I think that's going to be a great way to cascade the probably the master skills or the core skills of the teachers in delivering the multimodal literacy and multiliteracy itself. But I'm thinking as well, probably in Indonesia, we also need to have this multiliteracy or multimodal literacy for the bureaucracy. So they can actually learn, like what you said, because they're very busy. They don't have enough time to actually read all of these great findings from all the academics, from all the researchers who have done such an amazing work in developing tools that can actually help the national education in designing good English language development. So yes, I think there's something that we need to do also about the bureaucracy, Prof. Victor. You very help them so they can read amazing. Dr. Gung, Prof. Victor, great presentation.
Thank you very much, Padi. Yes, I think it's the same in Singapore as well. The bureaucracy, the policymakers require us to be able to present materials to them that is relevant to their needs and also at the same time accessible. So, well, like I say, I have done a few presentations to the Education Ministry. I'm going to do another one in April. Hopefully, they would recognize and appreciate the work done here and make certain changes in the policies and curriculum as well as assessment. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Very great explanation from Dr. Victor Lim. Well, the next question is coming from Bapak Prof. Sudipe from Udayana University, Bali, Indonesia. Bapak Prof, floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Bu Dian, as a moderator for the time. And good morning, Prof. Dr. Victor Lim. Yeah. Welcome to this session. I have one comment and 2 questions. The first comment based on or referring to your introduction that you said that in this case, we are not relying on listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And also you put some more additional remark about viewing. I recounted that when the pandemic COVID-19, we did a lot of online lecturing time. So if I can propose your what we call strategy here is I have read that that is also called 6 language art. Yeah, 6 language art, including listening, speaking, reading, writing, viewing, and visual representing. Viewing is a combination with listening and reading, and visual representing is combination between speaking and writing. So, and then I have more insight from you is I can put what we call multiliteracy method. I'm very happy to do this one, and then I will apply in my classroom. And then my first question, dealing with learning processes. In your slide, you classified into 4. Number 1 is encountering, expressing, exploring, and evaluating. I'm interested in having more information about evaluating, because at the end, I hope you can elaborate to know how to evaluate to get the classroom, what we call a learning outcome. Classroom learning outcome. You said here, number 1 is knowledge process. You will use analyzing. Process focus is perspective. Learning domain is critical. Pedagogical strategies is comparison. And literacy skill questioning. And then ultimately you said it is critical perspective consisting of 2 things. Encourage question about the text, and then design collaborative learning for social knowledge building. I'm very interested in the last one, designing collaborative learning for social knowledge building. My question is, Prof. Victor, can you give the real example you apply in Singapore school based on your research? Because I read your research result very, what we call, promising to do in Indonesia. Can I continue number 2? It is question number 2. In terms of challenges in teaching modalities. There are 3 you mentioned. Resources for thinking and talking about multimodality. And then perception of teachers and students. And then number 3, practices in the classroom. My concern is about meta language, because I did a lot of meta language, especially in semantic in Bali or in Udayana University. What we call do research a lot using what we call meta language approaches. But I need some comment from you, especially resources for thinking and talking about multimodality. You subdivided into developing the meta language and learning the meta language. My question is, you elaborate in such a way that it is mentioned clearly and systematically. I believe it is very systematically. However, what is the simplest way you expect us as a teacher to develop and learn meta language in this concept? Thank you very much, Prof. Victor. Yeah, thank you, moderator, for the time. Yeah, I hope you can give us insight about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Supia. These are very, very important questions, very, very good questions. I don't know whether I can do full justice to what you have raised by just giving you the response directly, but I will also, where appropriate, point you to further articles that I've written so that you get a fuller flavor of some of the things that we have talked about. So what I will do is, of course, to address the comments and questions that you have one by one. The first is in relation to the framing of using the viewing and visual representing approach. I think that is interesting. And at the end of the day, we should not be too distracted by the labels themselves. What is important is the concepts, the ideas behind it. I have used viewing and representing simply because they are the terms that have been introduced in the English language syllabus in Singapore. So I did not want to complicate it by using another set of terminology. Now, viewing itself, I can see the resonance of what you mentioned, because in the Singapore context, viewing, reading, and listening are classified as the reception skills, the receptive skills, and they and they can be appropriated together. Likewise, speaking, writing, and representing are categorized under the production skills. And while we want to be intentional in developing the knowledge and skills for each specific aspect, reading, writing, speaking, listening, viewing, and representing, we also want to see them as in relation to whether they are reception and production skills, and they can be integrated in the literacy development of our students. So that's my response to the first comment. I think in principle, we are thinking about the same thing, which is important. The different schools, different systems may have used slightly different labels, but in principle, the importance of broadening literacy beyond language learning and the engagement with multimodal text has been something that many education systems, teachers, and schools have recognized. So the second, thank you very much for the very detailed listening of what I've shared with regard to the learning process. And you mentioned about how you are interested in evaluating, and that is right, because that is something that many teachers are very interested in as well, the critical perspective. How can we get our students to be critical in relation to the kind of text that they read? So my argument in the book, and also with my work to the teachers, is that you have to develop them systematically. You can't expect them to be able to evaluate, to move into the evaluating of the text before you have appropriately supported them in the exploring of the text. So the learning process of exploring is important, because that is where you introduce the meta language, the concepts and the terms, to give them a language to be able to identify evidence from the text to support their interpretation. So, for example, if they say that this text this advertisement text tries to sell me the product using reason, because it gives me a lot of different arguments and points, statistics, and information about the product. So when they begin to recognize that, they are able to identify evidence to support their interpretation. So that is the encountering aspect that's important. And it's only when that's the exploring process that's important. And it's only when the exploring process is done well, that students can build on their interpretation, to question it, to think about the different interpretations that they have, and to question whether they agree with the values and the ideas that is supported by the interpretation. So you highlighted a point that I've made in the last line of the learning process of evaluating on designing for social collaborative knowledge building, or collaborative social knowledge building processes. And one example that we have done in Singapore is to use a discussion forum. We have one that's under research now, called We Read, but we have also used, for instance, Moodle or Google Classroom, so that students are able to comment and build on each other's posts and responses. So that digital learning experience allows students to be able to collaborate with one another, and to build on the ideas and to challenge the ideas from one another. So when you design for such an experience, using a discussion thread, a discussion forum, you allow the students to be able to learn and build on knowledge collaboratively. So that is one way in which the learning process of evaluating can take place in the digital learning environment. With regard to the third point that you asked in relation to the meta language, I think the first important thing for us to do is to identify what are some of this meta language that can be easy and useful for us to explore in the classroom. So I'm going to put in the chat a paper that I have written with Bill Cope and Mary Calantis. It is called, let me see. is a paper that outlines a possible meta language that you can use in a very simple way in the classroom. And for this, we apply it in the primary school classroom to talk about the different forms of meaning and different functions of meaning. So let me just get the actual paper, and then I will put it in the chat so you can look at it. And I will be interested, of course, to hear your thoughts on what we have proposed as a way to introduce this meta language for primary school students in the classroom. So what I will do now is to put it in the chat, and you can check out the link to this paper. It's an open access paper published with Frontiers in Communication. And in the paper itself, we have a proposal of how a set of meta language can be taught. So that will be a different talk altogether. But I would love to hear your perspective on that, Professor Sudhir.
Well, thank you very much for your explanation, Professor Dr. Victor. Thank you, Bapak Professor Sudipo also.
Yeah, thank you very much. I do agree with Prof. Victor that listening and reading is a receptive skill, and then speaking and writing is productive skill. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bapak Prof. Sudipo. And we still have about 10 minutes for discussion session. I'm going to invite one more question. This is from Rizkayani. Rizkayani. Okay. From Rizkayani, the question. I would like to read the question maybe from Rizkayani. I want to ask about how the teacher in Singapore combines the learning styles of their students with the multiliteracies model.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rizkayani. I think, first of all, we also recognize that recent research has challenged the idea of the students' learning styles and adapting to students' learning style per se. So we want to be mindful of that we do not want to just teach to the different students' learning styles, but really we want to help students to develop ways of learning through different styles, right? So that is the purpose of the multiliteracies lesson, not just so much to cater to the different styles of learning for each child, but to develop in them the capacity to learn through different styles. And one of the ways that we have talked about just now, I think Prof. Sudipa also recognized, is the learning processes that we have. So the learning processes focuses not just in relation to learning as in terms of cognitive development, but we also want to engage them to learn through effective ways as well by relating to their emotions, their senses. But more importantly, we also want them to be able to demonstrate their learning, not just through words, but also through embodied meaning making. So through creating different types of multimodal text, but also through role play and to drama. So when we talk about multimodal communication, ultimately it's about building out the students' resources to appreciate and know how to make meaning differently with different modes of meaning making. So using gestures, using facial expression, using images, using music, using videos. And therefore, at the end of the literacy learning experience, the students are not pigeonholed into a specific type of styles that they prefer, but really they are able to learn across the different styles and make meaning through the different modes of representations that they have. So that is the goal, and the way we do it is really to be guided by the learning by design framework, as well as the learning processes that I have talked about just now. Where if you bring them through the different learning processes, you are giving them opportunities to learn across the different styles and to explore meaning making across different modes. I hope that answers your question.
Well, thank you very much for your explanation again, Professor Dr. Victor Lim. And we still have about 5 minutes. Maybe from Bapak Prof. Deo Komang Tantra wants to ask a question. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Victor Lynch. I'm here offline. It's a very interesting meta modality for language teaching. So is it possible we develop design research specifically aimed for reading? What do you think? Thank you.
Yeah. Certainly, I think project to think about, because when we think about reading, we are not just only but increasingly our young people are reading digital text as well. So when they navigate the website, when they read news on social media, Kindle or Kobo, instead of print books, this that is needed. What are the different skills that may be needed? There's something that to now there is this little project that we did with my colleague here, how to teach digital reading, and I'll put the paper here as well.
Yeah.
But what I want to share with is that what the recognition we have is that digital reading or reading online, reading websites, they are very, very different from reading in print, and there are different news and there are different skills and knowledge that are needed, right? So that is the paper that I put in the link, and it's a good way for us to start thinking about reading itself, as the technology has brought about different demands on reading, and what are these new knowledge and skills that are needed in reading today, especially when you read across network sources, when you read across social media and internet sources as well. So that is another piece of project that is worth exploring a little bit more in that regard.
Yeah, thank you. But is there any possibility we talk about better cognitive reading through meta modality? Is that possible? Oh, that's the feasible to do research on that.
It's something to explore a little bit more, certainly, because when you talk about metacognition, that is also one of the emphasis we have in the English syllabus. As I mentioned just now, we have multiliteracies, we have metacognition, and we have inquiry through dialogue. So metacognition certainly is very much seen as also part of the 20 competencies that we want our students to develop. So yes, certainly, I think there will be interest in thinking about reading and writing in relation to getting students to reflect on their own thinking processes as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you once again for your explanation, and thank you for to Bapak Professor Deo Komang Tantra as well. And we still have 3 minutes, about 3 minutes, and one more question from Jonathan Ecclesia Laia. The question is, I'm going to read the question. I want to ask about the concept of implementation of multiliteracies. Is it possible this model is implemented not only in language teaching and learning? If so, how do we apply this model as well? That is the question, Prof.
That is a very good question as well, Joe. What I know is that I have colleagues, researchers from overseas. They are interested in what they call disciplinary literacy. So in other words, thinking about how language is used in the learning of science, how language is used in the learning of history, and how language is used, for instance, in the learning of architecture. So different disciplines, when they communicate, when they express their knowledge, they will use language. But at the same time, they are also using a multimodal representation. So if you think about learning science, you're also learning how scientific knowledge is represented through diagrams, through figures. Learning mathematics, you're learning also about the symbolism. For instance, learning architectural design, you're also learning about the privileged ways in which you are expressing your ideas, not just with words, but through the figures and tables and the representations, the models they are building. So I have researchers and colleagues overseas. They are very much looking at this in terms of drawing attention to how in different disciplines, in order for you to learn the discipline, you are learning the way in which language is used to represent the knowledge, but also the way in which the multimodal representations are used to represent the knowledge and drawing attentions to it. Even in engineering, I mean, I have colleagues that look at in engineering studies at the tertiary level, that they are not just learning the concepts through words, but they're also learning how to draw diagrams and images. And part of multiliteracies in that regard is to then help the teachers and students to think about the privileged ways. So the way, for instance, diagrams are represented in, say, physics could be very different from the way diagrams are represented in chemistry or biology, and drawing attention to that rather than thinking that it's something that is intuitive, something that is that the students will pick up anyway. I think the multimodal perspective encourage us to draw attention to this specific ways of meaning making, and in so doing, guide the teachers and students in making this privileged representation for as part of the disciplinary literacy. So I hope that gives you a sense that, yes, while I have looked at the language classroom, the notion of multimodality, multimodal meaning making is not limited to just language learning, but it's also very much a part of an increasing and emerging area of research called disciplinary literacy.
Well, thank you very much for your clear explanation, Professor Victor Lim. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are very sorry because we have limited time. Once again, thank you very much for your sharing, explanations that give us knowledge, insight about multiliteracies, English language syllabus in Singapore that can give us new insight and idea. And it is very great and nice to have you as our keynote speaker of today. Thank you once again, Professor Faye Victor Lim. Please give big applause. And I would like to give the time back to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bu Dr. Gusti Ayu Agung Dian Susanti, for guiding the presentation session. Before we end this guest lecture session, we would like to have a documentation session first. So for all participants, we invite you, please turn on your camera. And then for the operator, please take a picture because we have 3 slides here. We will start with the first slides. Ready? Okay. Smiles, 1, 2, 3. Okay, next slides, please. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, and the last slides. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Last but not least, we would like to say thank you very much to our speakers today, Association Prof. Faye Victor Lim, for devoting his valuable time. Also, for all audience today, all the lecturers and also the students, thank you so much for joining this session. This session became amazing because of you. Finally, we'd like to close the session and see you on our next occasion.
Thank you.
Santi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Victor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
For
you,
all
Prof. Lim.
participants, you may leave the chat, and don't forget to fill in the attendance records on the chat.
So I leave the chat.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Ya, izin leave.
Yes, everyone, you may leave the session. Thank you so much for joining. Don't forget to fill the attendance list. Thank you.